Brangle had a remarkable experience that changed the course of his life. In his book, Helps to Holiness, which you can read online, still available, the full book, he explained that on the 9th of January in 1885, at precisely 9 a.m, God sanctified his soul. So this should spark our interest, because we're part of the Wesleyan tradition, part of the holiness movement. Holiness is a major concern for us. We even have a whole doctrine dedicated to the experience of sanctification. It states that all believers can be fully sanctified and kept blameless in spirit, soul, and body on this side of heaven. Our doctrine assumes a very generous and broad belief in God's grace, that God not only saves us from sin, but is also able to keep us from sin. In other words, we believe in full salvation. Just as God is holy, we believe that we can be holy too. But I have some questions about this, and I wonder if you've ever had similar questions. Is it really possible to be made holy? Or is this an outdated doctrine? And is it no longer relevant? I anticipated when I was writing this week that I would have a story about a sin I committed this morning, perhaps, going off at the kids for not running on time, but actually we had a smooth morning, relatively smooth. What does holiness even look like today? Samuel Brangle responded to some of these questions in his writings, and in particular, we find this description of his experience of holiness. Just as I got out of bed and was reading some of the words of Jesus, he gave me such a blessing as I never had dreamed a man could have this side of heaven. Oh, how I loved. In that hour, I knew Jesus and I loved him till it seemed my heart would break with love. I loved the sparrows, I loved the dogs, I loved the horses, I loved the little urchins on the streets. I loved the strangers who hurried past me. I loved the heathen, I loved the whole world. Did I skip the line? It was a heaven of love that came into my heart. It was worth repeating if I did say it. And of course, 1885, when some of these words, heathen, I'm not sure, would you call someone a heathen, or the urchins on the street, but you get the idea. Brangle experienced an instantaneous moment of change brought on by God's love. And it changed him. That change gave him a deep, unmatched love, an unmatched love for God, and a profound love for all of God's creatures. He said, I saw a little worm wriggling across my path. I stepped over it. I didn't want to hurt any living thing. He was overwhelmed with a love that reached the very lowest as well as the grandest part of creation. Sanctification came on him like a blanket of love, and it flowed out from him. What Samuel Logan Brangle experienced shows us is that holiness and love are two sides of the same coin. To be sanctified is to love. And so if that's the case, as we understand love, we will understand the call to holiness. In the passage read to us earlier, we find that as Jesus was preparing for his death, he gave his disciples a new commandment to love one another. Except the rule to love was not a new commandment. Any good Jew who was dedicated to following the law was instructed to love. In Leviticus 19, the Israelites were told to not harbour hate in their hearts, nor seek vengeance or bear a grudge. Instead, they were told to love their neighbours. Jesus would have been well aware of this ancient commandment. So why did he say there was a new rule for his disciples? The Torah instructed, love your neighbour as yourself. But in John's Gospel, Jesus does not say, love your neighbour as you love yourself. Instead, he said, love one another as I have loved you. So while the commandment was not a new rule, the standard for loving was. Instead of loving others by the same measure of love for self, the new benchmark was Jesus' example of love. We get a picture of the nature of Jesus' love when we look at what happens just prior to this episode where he gives the commandment. I need to have a drink of water. In the first part of the chapter, we find Jesus in the upper room with the disciples, and after sharing the Passover meal, he takes on the role of a servant. And he gets down on his hands and knees, and he begins to wash his disciples' feet. Now, in the ancient Middle East and Mediterranean world, and I think you know this, foot washing was a humiliating and hard and putrid task. It would have entailed washing off animal and quite possibly human waste. There was no plumbing system, or at least the plumbing system would have been, quite simple. So of course there would be a mess. Now, if you've stood in dog poo, you might begin to understand something of the nature of foot washing in the ancient context. It's not great, especially, I think, when other people notice that you stood in it and they, give you that look. It's so humiliating. Now imagine this in the context of the foot washing that Jesus is doing. It was a demeaning, humiliating, and dirty task. In the ancient world, foot washing was reserved for a servant. It was a duty given to a person with no power or position, and it was linked to dishonour, disgrace, and humiliation. Yet Jesus, the master and the teacher, humbled himself and got in among the mess. He got his hands dirty, removing the mud and waste from each of his disciples' feet. He crossed the boundary of purity and situated love, holiness, in and among the difficult and common parts of life. He situated God-like love in servanthood and demonstrated that relinquishing power and position is to love like him. And when Jesus had finished washing their feet, he said to them, "If I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example that you also ought to wash one another's feet." In washing their feet, Jesus established a new standard of love. He demonstrated that being his loving disciple, being a holy person, involved overturning the social and cultural norms by practicing humility, focusing on others, giving up self-importance, and sitting in the mess and dirty places of life. there is something else going on here that we must pay attention to. Jesus said, "Wash one another's feet." The task wasn't one-directional. Jesus was inviting the disciples to mutual service, each disciple called to serve the other, and each disciple to receive the same service. Jesus' example was one of mutual giving and receiving. He said, "As I have done, you do, and do for one another." The Gospels show us that Jesus not only gave of himself, but he was also the one to receive the love and devotion and actions of others. Think about the woman who anointed Jesus' feet with the oil or the perfume. Or think about Zacchaeus who offered Jesus a meal. On these occasions, Jesus was the recipient of hospitality, kindness, and generosity. A close look at the account of Jesus' love shows us that God-like love is marked by mutual sharing and service, giving and receiving. Christ-like love is attuned and orientated towards others. Loving like Jesus means living in solidarity with others. I suspect for some of you that it's easier to serve than it is to be the one to receive service. What if being the recipient is holiness? I'll leave that thought with you. A close look at the account of Jesus' love shows us that God-like love is marked by mutual sharing. Jesus' example of love demonstrates that love is a whole of life experience in relationship with others, a willingness to stand with others in the good times and the bad. Loving like Jesus requires immersion in community. But Jesus' love also led him all the way to the cross, to suffering and death, demonstrating the costliness of love. But it also led him all the way to resurrection, demonstrating how love is full of hope and anticipates that all things will be renewed and restored. Jesus, the holy God, situated holiness in community. Holiness took on flesh and lived in and among people receiving and giving love. As it was for the first disciples, so it is with us. The new commandment is ours to keep too. We are called to such love in community. We are called to be holy people in and among others, giving and receiving love. What's intriguing about Samuel Logan Brengle's experience of holiness is that he described it as an overwhelming, overflowing impulse, almost like he could not help himself. He wrote, "It was a heaven of love that came into my heart." What this highlights is the source of love and holiness. We are unable in our own efforts to be holy. It is God's grace that makes us holy. It's God's grace that makes us loving people. It is the love of God in our lives that enables us to live a life of love. God does the loving in and through us. It is only the triune God who can make us into loving people, dynamically transforming us as God's love flows in us and out of us. Soon after Jesus had said the new commandment, in chapter 15 of John, he said, "I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me, you can do nothing. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love." John 15, verse 5 and 9. The word abide is repeated frequently in this passage, so it gives us a clue what it's all about. It is the abiding nature of the relationship with God that is important. Consider the nature of God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, a community of love, mutual giving and receiving, undivided and co-equal, a flow of mutual ongoing love. It's to this that Jesus offers to the disciples participation in a communion of love. He says, abide in this community. Abiding means we've got to depend on him, giving up some of our control and power. Abiding with God as the source of love. And as we adhere to him as disciples, God gives us the gracious provision of love. As we stick close to God's love, the love is made perfect within us. It changes us. It makes us holy. As we allow God's nurturing grace to flow in and through us, we are made holy. As we abide in the love of the Father and the Son through the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, as we keep in proximity with God, God's likeness rubs off on us. We find our way to holiness when we find our way to love. Such love flows from us as we abide in God, as we remain in him. It's by grace we are made holy. We are enabled to love as Jesus loved. And he showed us that the context of love is always in relationship with others. In her writings on godliness, Catherine Booth wrote a simple but powerful explanation of love and holiness. Since she was a 19th century preacher, her language was not inclusive, so I've adapted her words, but I've kept the original for you to see on the slide. Give me a person sincere and thorough in their love, and that is all I want. That will stretch through all the ramifications of their existence. It will go to the ends of their fingers and their toes, through their eyes and through their tongue, to their spouse and to their family, to their shop and to their business, and to their circle in the world. That is what I mean by holiness. What's she saying? Holiness lives right here in and among us, in our day-to-day lives, in the real world. It's how we live every day of the week. By grace, as we abide in God, love flows out in and through us. This is what I mean by holiness. I wonder if this morning you have felt the heaven of love come into your heart? Are you desiring it? Since holiness is a gracious gift from God, all we need to do is come to God by faith and with openness. Are you ready for it? Are you open to God? Do you have faith that God will make you holy? By God's grace, you can have that encounter and be made God's loving disciple and have today full salvation. And for those of you who have already experienced a heaven of love flooding your life, and you're already living out of that mutual giving and receiving relationship of God, pray for those who are yet to have that experience. The beautiful hymn, Take My Life, is going to be our prayer today. Take notice, because each verse prepares us for a visitation of God's grace until we get to the final verse that says, Take my love, my Lord, I pour at thy feet its treasure store. Take myself, and I will be ever only all for thee. I invite you this morning to make this your prayer. Now, we have this place in our worship in the Salvation Army called the Holiness Table. If you didn't know, this table here, and many of you, I'm preaching to the converted, you've known about this table long before me. But this table here we call the Holiness Table. And it's traditionally been a place where people will come and pray for full salvation or thank God for full salvation. Maybe this morning you want to come forward. But of course, there's an altar in our hearts. You don't need to come forward. You can be right where you are today, thanking God for full salvation or asking, by grace, God, make me holy.